Good day, lords and ladies of the internet. I am your host today, the Parafox Archangel, the English gentleman of the internet, and I welcome you to the Darkest Dungeon class review, where we have a lot of classes to go through, so needless to say we will not be getting through all of them in this single episode. I mean, just look at how many mods I have to deal with. There is an awful lot of the mods which we have to do, a lot of them just being class mods, so we have a lot of things to go through. Now, you might be wondering where's my face cam, and the fact of the matter is, I believe my face cam would just get in the way of everything. So, let us begin with analysis. So the first question is, how are we going to review each of these classes? And after some extensive research, I have decided I am going to narrow it down to 5 different categories. Offense, in other words, attacking and all that. Defense, being self-survivability. Healing, this being both stress healing and HP healing. I thought about putting them in different categories, but I came to the conclusion that would lead to too many categories. Utility, this is things such as buffing, debuffing, frankly guarding, marking, other things like that. And then flexibility. Flexibility is how well they work in multiple positions, or at the very least, how well they can get back to their position. Alright? Okay. But before we begin, let's hear some random facts about looking at all the classes. These facts will be based entirely upon their base stats and not any of their abilities. So take that into consideration. First up, the Martyr has the highest base HP in the game, with numbering at 68. The Black Swordsman, otherwise known as Guts, comes in second with 67. The lowest HP in the game is the poor, innocent little Grove Tender, with just a measly 27. And to put that into perspective, the Antiquarian, the weakest character in the base game, has a sum total of 29. Only 3 classes in the game have the highest dodge number of 35. Those are the Grove Tender, Jester, and the Thorn. There are 2 classes in the game which have no dodge whatsoever. Those 2 classes are the Enigma and the Ironclad. Speaking of which, there are also 3 classes which have protection inbuilt into the class itself, those being the Enigma and Ironclad, surprise surprise, and the Hollow Knight of all things. The Thorn is the only class in the game which has accuracy built into the class. I cannot understand the reasoning for this, when they can simply increase the accuracy of the abilities by 20 instead of building it into the class, but I'm sure they have their reasons. The Seer is the only class in the game which has a total of 0 critical chance. The only one. The next lowest is 3, which is the Ironclad. The Snake Charmer is in fact the class with the highest critical chance at 13, with about 3 others with about 12. The Black Swordsman, otherwise known as Guts, has the highest minimal damage in the game. However, he does not have the highest maximum damage. I was equally surprised to learn this myself. The highest maximum damage is the Ironclad, with 30. Guts' highest maximum is only 29. This, however, does mean that Guts does have the highest average damage in the game, with the Ironclad being second, with the Leper being third. But the Leper, frankly, is more reliable than the Ironclad, so the Leper probably can take the second place trophy. The Antiquarian is the one with the lowest damage in the game. Remember, this is based entirely upon their stats and not status ailments such as Blight. For example, we all know that in fact the Flagellant is not the second worst in DPS, as he is listed from just his base stats. The Martyr and the Ronin have the lowest disease resistance in the game, numbering only at 10%. Kind of surprising, really, when you think about it. Whereas the Ironclad has the highest disease resistance in the game at 95%. The reality is that it's actually 100%, but the game physically won't let it be more than 95%. The Enigma has the highest stun resistance in the game, numbering at 140%, thus making it immune to basically all stuns unless the stun is crit. There are 4 classes in the game which are above the 96% average of Deathblow resistance. Those are the Martyr, the Flagellant, the Dark Wraith, and the Black Swordsman. Funny enough, there are also 4 classes which are below this average, those being the Hollow Knight, the Ronin, the Red Mage, and the Homunculus. The Ironclad has the highest move resistance, numbering at 160%, thus making it immune to, I think, probably even crit move abilities, which, frankly, the Ironclad needs. There are 3 classes which are basically immune to bleeding. The Homunculus, which has 360% bleed resistance, the Hollow Knight, which has 260%, and then the Ironclad, which is numbering at 160%. The most likely of those to be able to bleed is the Ironclad, but still, they really need to work at it to make them bleed through that iron shell. Now for just a simple fun fact. The Thorn, the character who is actually blind, has more trap disarm chance than the Vovaloid. Get over yourself, Vovaloid. You're not that pompous. Now we get to move on to the actual class reviews. And to start off with, we're going to be doing the base classes, aka the ones from the initial game. Now, I'm going to obviously be reviewing them with the trinkets in mind, this including the mod trinkets. So, needless to say, let's start with the good old Crusader. The Crusader is a very interesting character, which is, I've always thought to be powerful, but I've never realized how powerful. And to put that into perspective, let me say that including the mod characters, the Crusader has the 7th highest HP in the game, and actually has the 11th highest average DPS in the game. Now this is out of 68 characters, so that's pretty high ranked, especially for one of the base classes. So it kind of leads to the idea that the mods don't really just add overpowered characters, not looking at you, Guts, and can actually just add some interestingly mechanicked classes instead. So, I suppose the best way for us to begin is to grade their offense stat. Now, according to the wiki, the Crusader has above average damage, which is not that hard to see after seeing that. So you can easily tell that the Crusader is a decent damage-dealing character, when you just initially think they're just the tank, which is not hard to believe when they have the Bulwark of Faith ability, which is a very good defensive ability. But they also have Smite, which is just average accuracy with a bit of a crit mod. They don't have the highest crit, does the Crusader, but it's certainly not bad. Now with 10 to 19 damage, you can tell they hit hard. Funny enough, their AoE ability of Zealous Accusation only has a 40% negative to damage mod instead of the standard 50%, making them slightly better at AoE attacks. So overall, for their offense capability, I have to give them a grade of B. They're not top tier, but they're certainly good. As for their defensive ability, they just have really good HP, basically the standard dodge rating, so even when clad in this heavy armor, they're still pretty good at avoiding abilities, and then they got their Bulwark of Faith just giving them protection. So, for protection, I have to give them the big standard A. This can also be seen from the fact a lot of their trinkets involve protections and giving them more of it. Now we move on to healing. I have underestimated the Crusader's healing capability. Let me explain this. The Crusader heal is a 5 to 6 heal. Now, initially, you wouldn't think that's not very good, especially when you compare it to the Vestal's heal, which is 8 to 9. But then I compared it to every other healer in the game. The Paladin also has 5 to 6. The Lamire is 6 to 8. The Seer is 6 to 8. And it comes up with similar numbers. So, it's interesting to think that, in reality, it's not a top-tier heal. No, not by any form. But it still has the potential to be good. Especially if you combined it with the chicken. Which says that once a Crusader kills a monster, they get plus 50% healing skills on the next round. Obviously, it says 2 rounds, but buff effects end at the end of your round, so it's 1 round. This, in turn, means it goes up from 5 to 6 to about 7 to 9, which puts it on par with the Vestal. They also have a stress heal, which is -8. It's not much. That doesn't compare to the Jester, but it is still a good stress heal. Especially when it's got the heal on top. So if someone is suffering from extreme stress, but is also really low on HP, it helps in that manner. And then, with the additional help of the chicken, once again, that chicken really helps the Crusader become a support character. It gives them the ability to clear horror, which is an amazing bit of utility, and provide stress to the entire party. In addition, their Crimson Court trinket gives them bonus healing and stress healing. So, this review has made me think, maybe I've been playing the Crusader wrong. Maybe they're not entirely offense and defense. Maybe they have the potential to be an off-healer. Not your primary healer by any form, no. The off-healer, the one to support the healer when things get a little bit too tough. I think the Crusader has the potential for that, and isn't too bad at it. So for healing, I give the Crusader a grade of C. Now we move on to utility. And the question is, what utility does the Crusader have? The Crusader has the ability to mark themselves. That's a bit of utility. And they have a stun. Pretty standard stun, above its average accuracy with negative damage. So, that's it for what it has for utility. It's a decent stun, but it's not over the top for a stun. 140% is standard, so it's just a regular stun. So, needless to say, I'm going to give the Crusader a D grade for utility. They have a little, but it's not what they focus in. Now we ask about flexibility. So, now we have to kind of define flexibility a bit better. So, how do we define flexibility? Flexibility is what position they can work from, and how easy they can get into that position. So, for the Crusader, most of their abilities work in the position 1 and 2 for combat. They're a little bit restricted as to where they can work from. They do have Holy Lance, which works from the back 2 to bring them forward, which kind of aids in their flexibility if you equip it. And as for their healing works from any position. So if for some reason you bring them along as the primary healer, they can easily do that from any position. So for flexibility, I'm going to give the Crusader a D. They're a little flexible in being able to work from different positions, but not the best. So, for their overall grade, I'm going to give them a B. They're a solid class, and they're good at what they do, and they've got more options than I give them credit for. Next, we'll move on to the second class you're introduced to, the Highwayman. The Highwayman is your standard DPS character. So, let's look at their offense capability for a start. Their damage is 9 to 16. This may not be as high as the Crusader, but according to the statistics, it is technically above average by about 0.5. So, it's around the average number. But this is a little bit misconstrued on the simple basis that their melee offense ability has a 15% damage mod. This means that 9 to 16 becomes approximately something like 10 to 17. So their damage is even higher when they're in melee form. And this is another key thing about this is more talking about the flexibility side of the Highwayman, but the Highwayman has the ability to both be a melee character and a ranged character, which is really good when you think about it. So, yeah, so as you can see from their pistol shot, they deal minus 15% damage. That might seem bad, but that just puts them to approximately the standard for ranged characters at about 7 to 14. If that. And it has a significantly high crit mod at 11.5%. And when you top that on top of their original 9%, that means about 20% of the time they are going to crit with their ranged attacks. They also get bonus damage from marked, which is the standard for most ranged characters, quite frankly. They also have a riposte with them within their melee, and this riposte may have the negative 15% damage, but basically all ripostes do. And negative 15 isn't actually the highest amount for a riposte, it's actually fairly on the low side. In addition, they do have a bleed, giving them even more offensive capability for when you're dealing with things with high protections. So I feel I have to give the Highwayman an offense rating of A, simply due to both the numbers and the flexibility behind their offense rating. As for their defense, the Highwayman has 43 HP. That is the average. That is just the standard average. Both the average for the base classes in the base game, and the average for HP when you include my mods. Which is... the fact the number is the same is actually surprising in its own right, but we'll get into that another time. So, they have in purely average HP. They have 30 dodge, which is the above average number. Meaning they are much more likely to avoid attacks rather than just take them. They don't, however, have any defensive abilities. At all. None of their abilities aid in their defense at all. So for defense, I have to give the Highwayman about... probably it should be a D, but I'm giving it a C to be generous. Healing, they don't have any healing, that's null and void. Utility. The Highwayman has a little bit of debuffs attached within their character. The Grape Shot Blast increases the crit chance of critting an enemy. The Tracking Shot de-stealths an enemy. Now that's the key thing I think is the most important among the utility for the Highwayman. Just the de-stealth, and the fact it buffs them for even more damage for the entire battle. So logically, you want to use the Tracking Shot in most scenarios, just so that they, get the damage buff for the entire round, increasing their offense even more, so they're earning that A grade even more. But they don't really have anything else. Their bleed debuffs them for decreased bleed resist and speed, but that's not the most important of debuffs. So for utility, I'm going to give the Highwayman a C, simply because he can de-stealth. And that is really useful at the beginning of the beginning of a fight. I probably am overrating de-stealth a little, because it does wear off by about round 3 of a fight. But if there's something in the back that's stealthed, normally the stress dealers, that you really just want to deal with quickly, it's very invaluable having a de-stealth. Finally, for flexibility, I've already touched upon flexibility, so let's touch on it a bit more. Their melee attacks can be used within the first 3 rows. Positions, basically. Giving them immediately more flexibility for position than the Crusader. In addition, their Duelist's Advance gives them the ability to move forward in case they get out of position, or rather, they need to reposition themselves to aid their allies. Then, for their pistol shot, they can work from position 2 to 4, making them a very flexible ranged damage dealer as well, which is kind of surprising, because most ranged characters work from position 3 and 4, not the second position as well. So, for flexibility, I definitely have to give the Highwayman a B. They are extremely flexible in their positioning and where they can be, how easily they can get there, but they're certainly not the highest in the game. So, yeah. The Highwayman I probably haven't used at the beginning of this series, of my Darkest Dungeon series, but they have definitely grown on me to become a favourite character of mine, which is why I consistently use them within the farmstead. Another thing I feel I should touch upon with the Highwayman is their trinkets, because I did forget about this. Their trinkets are pretty standard. You have good ones, such as this, the Mugger's Knife, giving them plus 10% melee skills, and negative 3 crit. And another one, this one here, that gives them bonus chance to bleed, and bonus damage versus bleeding. And then you got the Gunslinger's Buckler, increasing their ranged attacks and range accuracy, while decreasing their melee damage. The trinkets of the Highwayman tend to lean towards either you favour ranged or you favour melee. And their trinkets amplify this entirely. For example, if you take a look at the Sunward Isle trinket, they get plus 40% crit with their melee skills, but minus 30% damage with their ranged skills. Now, mind, I don't think this is 40% crit, like you're going to crit 50% of the time, because Sunward Isles introduces the percentage as an actual percentage of the original number. So, with the melee mod, with the melee attack making it 20%, it'll actually be about 24% rather than 60%. But I've never used it, so I can't say. So, their trinkets just help amplify the fact that they're the damage dealers of the group. A thing I forgot to touch upon within their utility, when talking about the utility originally, is their Trap Disarm. Trap Disarm comes under the category of utility, and with the Highwayman having 100%, that means they can easily become your Trap Disarm character. Next, I'd like to talk about the Arbalist and the Musketeer. Now, these two I will be reviewing together, and the reasoning for that is because they're the same goddamn character. The only differences between them is a couple of trinkets. And not even normal trinkets, like their Crimson Court trinkets are identical to each other as well. The main difference in trinkets I find between them, within the base game, is their Wrathful Hats, or bandana, for the Arbalist. The Wrathful Bandana, frankly, is better than the Wrathful Hat, in my opinion. While the Wrathful Hat gives 20% damage for position 4, but it also reduces healing received, whereas the Wrathful Bandana just reduces healing skills and gives 25% damage, thus meaning that by that logic, the Arbalist is a slightly bit better. Now, my rating might be a bit skewed by the fact I don't actually have a Sunward Isle trinket for the Musketeer, but the Sunward Isle trinket for the Arbalist just helps amplify the fact they're a marked build. In other words, both of these characters you want to use within a marked game, because both of them deal 100% bonus damage versus marked, which is just immense when you think about it. It turns the 7 to 14 damage into 14 to 28. That is almost comparable to the Black Swordsman. So, first we talk about offense, and the fact is they are offense characters. They have their sniper shot or their aimed shot, depending on which one you're using, and it just does decent damage even without marked, which is 7 to 14. Which is about the average for their for damage. I think it is a bit below the average for damage, being at 10.5 compared to the average of 12, but that tends to meet the mold. Because ranged characters always deal less damage than melee characters. Probably because of the fact they're simply safer in the backline most of the time, so yeah. As for their defenses, they suffer from the same sort of scenario as the Highwayman, in the fact that they don't really have any defenses. All they have for defense is their HP and their dodge, and then whatever trinkets you give them. But within the standard game, there aren't any trinkets that either of them uses, which give them bonus protections or whatnot. So, they have 47 HP and 20 dodge. 47 is above the average HP by 4, but it's still basically the average. As for their dodge being only 20, that means, according to the wiki for Darkest Dungeon, they're considered to have below average dodge. Which I find funny, because when you then include the mods, the most common dodge number within all the classes I have, including my mods, is 20. Meaning they have the standard for dodge. They're not above average, they're not below average, they're just standard. Same with their HP. So for defenses, I'm going to have to give the pair of them a rating of D. They don't really have any defenses. That doesn't mean they're innately weak. They didn't get a grade F, for example, but they are just kind of plain. Now for healing. I have to give them a healing rating because they do have a healing skill. Patch Up. I believe it's the same skill for both of them. No, the Arbalist's is called Battlefield Bandage. Now, the Battlefield Bandage and the Patch Up give 4 to 5 healing. That is a bit on the low side. It's not really any groundbreaking in any shape or form. The thing that's groundbreaking about it is the healing received buff, being 38%. This means that if your tank is a bit damaged, or your DPS is a bit damaged, you can just they can spend their turn giving the healing buff to the tank, and then let your primary healer actually give them a proper heal for 40% extra healing, which is just nice. However, that comes under utility, not healing. So for healing, I'm just going to give them an E. Actually, no, I'm just going to give them an F, because that's all it is. 4 to 5 heal, and they can't do a healing position in any form. So now we'll move on to utility, and as I just mentioned, the healing buff alone is really good utility. What other utility do they have? Well, they got a mark, which is just, they mark an enemy, and debuff it for minus 30 dodge. Pretty good. Pretty good. They also have Rallying Flare, which is de-stealth and a bypass of de-stealth. It also gives bonus torch, clears marked targets on your heroes, clears stun, and gives a chance for negative stress. It's not groundbreaking negative stress, but it's a little bit of negative stress. The point is that it gives D-stealth to the entire enemy, and clears stun, making it even more of a support ability. So, for you, and their suppressing fire decreases the accuracy and crit chance of the back row targets. The fact it only targets the back row is a little bit on the worst side, but yeah, it's still there. In addition, their bowler has knockback, which is just nice. The fact it's only 105% though, at the level 5 ability, makes it bad though. When you think about that the standard percentage chance of anything happening is 140% at the max tier abilities, that means that is 35% weaker than a standard knockback. So, I can't if anything, I'd say that's more of a detriment to their utility score than a bonus to it, just because of how bad it is. But for their other abilities, they're good, they're standard. Mostly the rallying cry, giving them a lot of utility, as well as the patch-up, giving that buff. So for utility, I'm going to give them, for now, I'm going to give them a C. I'm debating whether to give them a B instead, but it's more like, how about a C+? That works. They get a C+. So, now we move on to their flexibility. For their flexibility, they work in position 3 and 4, and have no abilities that send them back there. So for flexibility, I'm just going to give them an E. They have blind fire, which works in the first 2 positions, but it's a little inconsistent, and their rallying flare. Those are the only 2 abilities in their arsenal which work in position 1 and 2. Not even the field bandage works in the front row positions, or the mark, which is a little bit surprising. So, yeah, I'm going to give them an E for flexibility. And so, I believe the total scores was a B for offense, a D for defense, F for healing, C for utility, E for flexibility. I'm going to give them an overall grade of about a C. They're good characters, they're not groundbreaking in any way, but they're up to mark, they're standard, they work well for their role. So, yeah. Although I feel that if I'm going to give it a little bit more bias, it's the Musketeers a C and the Arbalist is a C+. Just because of the mild trinket changes that make them even better. Speaking of the mild trinket changes, to actually amplify my case for this, we'll look at the farmstead trinkets. The Musketeers is 20% damage and on attack, minus 20% target chance to hit 20% chance to hit a random target. And then the Arbalists, which is 20% damage, 7% additional crit, and when they attack, they have a 25% to give them 3 stress. So, not only does the Trinkets give the Arbalist more offense, it frankly makes the Arbalist a little bit more reliable, too. So, yeah. Arbalist C+, Musketeer C. Next, let's talk about the Bounty Hunter. The Bounty Hunter has become a favorite class of mine. By infinite means, because of the sheer potential the Bounty Hunter has. And this has been made only more apparent after looking at all these stats. So, let's begin. Let's start with their offense. The Bounty Hunter has 18 to 16 damage, which is the average damage within Darkest Dungeon at 12. And the funny thing about it is this is actually the average. So the Bounty Hunter's average damage is the average amongst all the classes. Then you take their standard attack, which is just normal accuracy for melee attacks at 105 accuracy. Then it's got 11% crit mod, which is just making them up to a total of 19% with that ability. And then it's just got the potential to just escalate that damage so much. A 90% damage increase versus marked is just kind of insane, because that would take their damage to almost 16 to 32. So it puts them more on the damage scaling of, like, the Black Swordsman against marked enemies. This just gives them so much damage potential. You also look at Finish Him, which just is good if the enemy is stunned, giving him the potential of putting him in a combo with characters that like to stun a lot. Then, if we simply look at his trinkets, we can also tell he has even more potential behind him. The Wounding Helmet, for example, which has always been a favourite of mine, just gives him another additional 25% damage, taking that 18 to 16 and bumping it up to about 10 to 20, which means that that their standard attack goes up to about 20 to 40. You can tell how well these numbers escalate. If you then combined him with his Crimson Court trinkets, which gives him an additional 20% damage versus marked, stunned, bleeding, there is just so much potential to just escalate the bounty hunter's damage out of proportion. Frankly, probably even a little bit more potential to escalate it out of proportion than the Highwayman, funny enough. However, it's a little more complicated to do so than the Highwayman. So, for the bounty hunter, I definitely have to give them an offense rating of A, without a doubt. Now for their defense. Their defense is 45 HP, which is the average, and 25 dodge. According to the wiki, this is the pure average. You're going to notice with the bounty hunter that they are the average. They have the average crit, they have the average damage, average HP, average dodge, and average speed. They are the standard, is the bounty hunter. So for their defensive abilities, they have the standard, and that's it. They have no abilities giving them bonuses, like any defensive capabilities, nothing like that. So, for defense, I'm just going to have to give them a D, once again. As much as it pains me to do so, because I love the bounty hunter so much and I just want to give them an A for everything, objectively speaking, it is just a D for defense. Healing. They don't have any. Moving on. Utility. The bounty hunter is a character which excels in utility as well. First, they got 100% trap disarm. This means that when going through a dungeon, they can easily be the person disarming all your traps, which alone is just nice. They have a mark, which reduces protections for the enemy, and it also buffs themselves. Now, with minus protection versus minus dodge, for a mark ability, I will always take minus protection, because dodge is mitigatable, but protections is a lot harder to get through. They got Come Hither, which pulls an enemy in the back row, and marks them. He has two marks abilities, both of which have utility and flexibility behind what they do as well, making him even more powerful when it comes to these abilities. Next, he's got Uppercut, which is a knockback and a stun, giving him stun potential for utility, as well as enemy positioning. So, for example, if there's an enemy which doesn't do its abilities properly in the back line, he can easily just knock them back and force them to do that. Next, we have Flashbang. It works on a single target and has a 150% chance to stun. This makes it above the average, making it what I would call a strong stun. I believe it also shuffles the target it hits, meaning they can easily just move completely out of position as well, giving it the same sort of utility as the uppercut. The difference is that it doesn't deal damage, so if you want to use the Bounty Hunter as an entirely utility character for marking, stunning, positioning, all that, the Bounty Hunter works with this ability perfectly. Next is Hook and Slice, which is a bleed, giving him a bit more offense, which he frankly doesn't need, and a debuff for -8 speed and 20% damage received. Normally, I don't care about negative speed on an enemy, but when it's a number as big as -8, you have to care a little, because the majority of enemies do not have more than 8 speed, even in the top tier dungeons, meaning this is a way you can easily make your characters work faster and kill the enemy before it gets a chance. And considering it increases the damage they take as well, it buffs it even further. So the Bounty Hunter, for a utility grade, frankly, I have to give them an A as well. They have so many options, and so many options to work from, so many options to do those options, having 2 marks, 2 stuns, and then the damage received debuff. They've just got so much potential behind them. It makes me actually feel I've wasted the potential of the Bounty Hunter so much by just not experimenting with them. Next, we talk about flexibility. The Bounty Hunter is a character I have always considered extremely flexible, because of the fact his melee attacks work like the Highwayman in position 1 to 3. But I never realised, until making this review, how flexible he is. Like, it is entirely possible to make it is entirely possible to make a build with the Bounty Hunter where he's the position 4 character, because he still has 4 abilities that work in position 4. The mark, the hook mark, the flashbang, and the hook and slice. It will completely neuter all of his offense ability by putting him in position 4, but the potential is still there if you really want to make a utility character for these things. Although, frankly, in this case, if you want to make them a position 4 character with marking, you're probably better off putting them in position 3, because most of the peak characters which are going to benefit from the mark are ranged characters which prefer to be in position 4. But that's besides the point. So now for flexibility, I have to give the Bounty Hunter a grade of B. They may be able to work from every position, but they can't reposition themselves without just moving. And while their move is good, being a 2 instead of a 1, and being able to move both backwards and forwards, it's still... they don't have any abilities to move them themselves. So for flexibility, it's definitely only a B. So, for the overall grade of the Bounty Hunter, I easily have to give them an A. Their defense might be the limiting factor of it being only a D, but the potential behind everything else is just so good that I just can't help but consider the Bounty Hunter a top-tier character, even if they are average in everything. They maybe have average stats all around, but that's to mitigate the fact they have the best arsenal of abilities for just flexibility and offense and, frankly, near everything. Now for the final character, because I'm running out of time, because these reviews take significantly longer than I give them credit for, let's talk about the Leper. The Leper is a shockingly strong character. Like, even more so than I ever thought they were. Let me put this into perspective. Let's start off with their damage. Their average damage is 19.5. You compare that to the standard of 12, and you can already see the grand difference in number. The problem with their offense tends to be is the fact that they've got an accuracy of 95. This is a little bit misconstruing, because of the simple ability that they have this, I assume, battle-long buff, which gives them plus 15 accuracy. That just takes it up to 110, which is technically above the standard for melee attacks, in terms of averages. In addition, their Crimson Court trinket set gives them plus 15 accuracy if above 60%, meaning they got even more accuracy and even less chance to miss. And when you just combine that with their obscene damage in the first place, it just has so much potential. Like, a 35% damage buff on someone who already does this much damage is kind of insane. Now, you're probably wondering, where does the Leper rank in terms of DPS in comparison to all the mods as well? Funny enough, he comes third. Something I was extremely shocked to know. He comes third, with the Thrall in fourth place and the Executioner in fifth. You're probably all very surprised by these numbers, but remember those statistics are from the base stats and not their abilities. In reality, the Thrall is probably a little bit more powerful because of the simple fact that his attacks bleed, but we'll get onto that when we review the Thrall. So, for the offense rating of the Leper, quite simply, I have to give them an S. Their offense is just too powerful to ignore. Now, let's look at their defenses. Funny enough, the Leper comes in joint 4th place for most HP, along with the Ironclad and the Royal Aegis. Again, this is one of those things that surprised me, because of how tanky the little bastard is. He is 20 dodge, which is below the Crusader, but 20 at this point is what I consider the average for defensive capabilities in dodge. Now the question is, does he have any other abilities that correlate to defense? The answer is yes. It's called Withstand. This ability is basically the Crusader's buff with more attached. The Crusader's Bulwark of Faith gives 30 protections and marks themselves, and increases Torchlight by 24. The Leper's is 30% dodge, 30% to all resistances, and marks themselves. So not only does it make them take less damage, it also makes them more resistant to all effects. Near enough. Granted, if you use his offense ability, his defensive capabilities are reduced, but in the long run, it's probably not that bad. In addition, he does have a self-heal. Now, I have come to learn I don't particularly like abilities which it's just the whole turn is spent with a character healing themselves. If the ability has other functionality, like the Black Swordsman's Riposte, it's a little better. But an ability which is just a self-heal and stress heal isn't the best. It can be useful in the right circumstances, but it's a matter of those circumstances. So, for defensive capabilities, if I graded the Crusader an A, that means the minimum grade for the Leper is also an A. So there you go, pal, an A. Now, healing. Doesn't have any. Moving on. Utility. Utility is something you'd think is a little out there for the Leper. Looking at the fact they're just a big beefy thing that hits very hard. But they do have two abilities which are very good for utility. The first being is Purge. Purge is a knockback at the standard percentage chance, making the enemy at the front line go straight to the back, which for most frontline enemies is really bad. And it also clears corpses, meaning it makes it even easier for the Leper to get to them in order to hit them. Now, an unfortunate thing I haven't really touched upon this entire review is their flexibility to hit other targets. The Crusader, the Leper suffers from the same problem as the Crusader in that they basically can only hit the first 2 rows. But that doesn't change their offense ability that much. It just kind of changes how it's used. So Purge has the ability to clear corpses, which is a very nice thing, and also buffs the Leper for bonus accuracy, which makes it even better. Now, the other thing which is really good for the Leper's utility is Intimidate. I did not realize how good this ability was. First, it actually does damage, which alone makes it a better utility ability. It bypasses stealth and de-stealths, which we've already established is an ability I really like. And then it reduces the damage of the enemy by 33%. That is a really good thing. And if anything, it buffs their utility as well as a bit of their defensive capability, because it means that they'll be taking less damage because the enemy is taking less damage. And it also buffs the Leper for +4 speed, which is the Leper's great weakness, having a speed of 4, which, while is actually better than the Crusader, is still a weakness. Considering the average speed in the game is 6.5. So now we talk, so for utility, I'm going to give the Leper a C. The Leper has quite a lot of utility, has a lot of useful utility, but he only has those 2 abilities. And you've got to remember you can only have 4 abilities equipped at once, so it kind of limits the potential. Now let's talk about the Leper's great weakness, flexibility. We've established flexibility is your ability to work in other positions, as well as how to get to them. The Leper has no flexibility whatsoever. The Leper likes to work in the first position, and only the first position. His standard attack of Chop can work in position 1 and 2, as can his AoE attack. But his Purge ability and Intimidate, his utility abilities, can only be worked in the first position. So, if you want to completely neuter the Leper's utility, his flexibility increases a bit. But only a bit. And not by a significant margin. In addition, his buffs can work in the back rows, so if you get surprised and need to reposition your team, you can actually have the Leper spend his turn buffing himself, as he normally would do anyway, rather than moving. It still doesn't help the fact he has no way himself to get back into position using his abilities, and only his move action, which I think is only 1. His flexibility for the Leper is easily an unfortunate F. So, with the grades of I think I graded him D for utility, and a F for flexibility, overall grade I have to give, just like the Crusader, a B. A really good character at offense, what he does, and defense too, if you want him to be a tank. And has a bit of utility behind him, if you want to go for that. But with so little flexibility, and ability to just position himself and all that, I just simply cannot give him an A grade for character. Now, I have been recording for an hour, and I have gotten through, I think, 5 characters, technically, for this review. Which simply means that, quite frankly, this is going to take significantly longer than I ever thought it would, and that I'm probably going to have to stream a review instead of actually doing videos on it. So, leave comments below on how you think I've graded the characters, what arguments you'd like to make in favour or against the characters I've reviewed. And be aware in the future for probably a stream of Darkest Dungeon where I will do this review for the episode instead of actually making an episode on it, because this is simply taking too long. So everyone, it looks like I'm all out of time for today's episode. So what can I say other than thank you all for joining me today. I have been your host, the Parafox Archangel, the English gentleman of the internet, and I hope to see you all again next time. But I'm afraid that, until then, it is time for me to bid thee all farewell, good day, and finally, good night. You can obviously just imagine I'm bowing right now.